In this video, we're going to discuss the equations of circles. So here we have a definition of what a circle is. A circle is just a set of points that are all the same distance from a fixed point, which we call the center of the circle. So every point on the circle is the same distance from the center. So this distance is the same as this distance, and this distance, and this distance, and so on, is what the definition is saying. And that distance is called the radius of the circle. When we're writing the equation of a circle, we usually use h and k for the coordinates of the center. And then we use our variables x and y to represent any point on the circle. Now, if we think about this as the distance between 2 points, we can use our distance formula. R is the distance. And we know that distance is given by the square root of the difference in the x values squared. So here that's x minus h, plus the difference in the y values squared. And here the y values are y and k. If we square both sides of this, the square root comes off, and then we have r squared on the right side. So this is what we call the standard form for the equation of a circle. The standard form allows us to easily identify what the center and radius of the circle are. So for example, if we have a circle centered at 3, 4 with a radius 5, we can write the equation by substituting 3 for h and 4 for k and 5 for r, so 5 squared is 25. If the center is 4, negative 5, and the radius is square root of 7, we're going to substitute 4 for h, and we're going to substitute negative 5 for k. Notice the formula already says y minus k, so here that would be y minus negative 5. Which we could just write as y plus 5. And then we're substituting the square root of 7 for r, and it's r squared on the right, so we have square root of 7 squared, which is just 7. So if we were given the equation in this form and we needed to graph it, we could do that pretty easily. We could find the center by finding h and k. It's a little bit tricky when you have a plus sign. You just have to think about that y plus 5 is the same as y minus negative 5. So that gives you the center, and then you'll go that distance of the radius from the center in each direction to graph the circle. Now sometimes the equation's not given in standard form. Sometimes it's given in general form, which is what we see here. So basically everything's been expanded out, and the radius squared has been brought over to the left side, and it equals 0. That's not super helpful when we want to graph it. We need to know the center and the radius in order to graph it. So if we have the equation in general form, we're going to start by rewriting it in standard form. And to do that, we're going to use a process called completing the square, which we have done before with quadratics. So the first step when you're completing the square is you want to get the constant term out of the way. So here we're going to add 3 to both sides. And the goal is to get it in standard form, which looks something like this on the left. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a number right here, and that will give us a trinomial for the first part. We'll have x squared minus 4x plus a number, and then that is going to factor to be x minus something squared. Similarly, we're going to add a number here so that y squared minus 6y plus that number factors to be the square of a binomial as well. So how do we know what number to add? When we deal with quadratics, a lot of times we refer to the coefficient in front of the x squared as a, the coefficient on the x term as b, and the constant term as c. So I'm going to keep referring to that number on the linear term, the coefficient on the linear term, as b. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut b in half, and then we're going to square that result, and that's the number that we add to both sides. So in this case we have negative 4x, so negative 4, half of negative 4 is negative 2, and then if we square negative 2 we get 4. So we're going to be adding 4. You're always adding a positive number because you're always adding something squared, which will always be positive. Now if we add it to the left side of the equation, we also have to add it to the right side of the equation, so just be mindful of that. This is just my line separating the two sides of the equation there. Alright, now over here the linear term has a coefficient of negative 6. So if we cut that in half, we have negative 3, and if we square negative 3, we get 9. So we're going to add 9 here, and again that means we have to add it to the right side of the equation as well. So on the left side now we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 plus y squared minus 6y plus 9. And on the right side we have 3 plus 4 plus 9, which is 16. Now we can go ahead and factor each part of this. We know it's going to be the square of a binomial. Once you get comfortable with completing the square, you'll probably know how this is going to factor. The sign is going to depend on what the sign on your linear term is, because your first and your last term will always be positive. But if this is subtraction here, then this is going to be subtraction here. If it's addition, then you'll have x plus something. And then whatever that number was that you squared, whatever half of b was, that's what's getting added or subtracted. So half of b was negative 2. So it always factors as x plus half of b. It's just half of b can be positive or negative. You don't have to know that though. You can just say, all right, I need to factor x squared minus 4x plus 4, and you can factor that as you normally would. You need two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to negative 4, which is negative 2 and negative 2. And you can split up your middle term and then factor by grouping. And in this case, you end up with x minus 2 times x minus 2, which is the same as x minus 2 squared. So by all means, don't feel like you need to memorize what the result is going to be. You can always just factor using your usual factoring technique. But if you do know what it's going to be and you don't want to write out all those steps, that's fine too. Here, half of b was negative 3, so it's going to be y minus 3 squared. Again, you can come off to the side and just factor as usual if you prefer. So this is the equation of the circle in standard form. Remember, this was our formula. So now we can identify the center and the radius. We have x minus h in the formula, and we have x minus 2 here. So h is 2. And then similarly we have y minus k, and y minus 3, so k is 3. So the center is 2, 3. And then r squared is 16, so r is 4. The radius is a distance, so it's always a positive number. So now if we want to graph this circle, we know the center and we know the radius. The center is 2, 3. So there's the center. And then the radius is 4. Now we discussed that every point on the circle is going to be 4 units from the center, but the easiest 4 points to find are the ones that are horizontally or vertically 4 units from the center. So if you start at your center and you go 4 units to the right, start at your center and go 4 units to the left, start at your center and go 4 units up, and start at your center and go 4 units down. That gives you enough points to draw the circle. This isn't going to be my best drawing with the device I'm using, but you'll get the idea. Here's another example. If we add 40, you always start by getting that constant term on the other side. So add 40. There's something different about this one. We don't have a linear term for the variable x. In the last one we had an x squared term and an x to the first term. Here we don't. So what we can do is just basically ignore that for now. We're still going to need to add something here to factor the y part. So half of b is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. So we're going to need to add 9 so that we can factor the y part. And we need to add it to the right side as well. And then the y part's going to factor as y minus 3 squared. And that's it. So what we have, since there was no linear term for x, what we have here is just x squared for that part of the formula. It's like we have x minus 0 squared essentially. So when you're comparing that to your circle formula, h is 0 for this one because we have x minus 0 squared. So when we're identifying the center, h is 0, k is 3. So the center is at 0, 3. And then r squared is 49, so the radius is 7. And then we can graph that just like we did before. So we'll plot our center. Center's at 0, 3 this time. And the radius is 7, so 7 units right. Start at the center and go 7 units left. Start at the center and go 7 units up. And 7 units down.